world driven by ideas, innovation, and influence. Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio, where insight meets execution and powerful stories shape real-world success. Here, we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to explore the ideas, strategies, and experiences defining our time. This is where clarity meets ambition and vision turns into action. So lean in, stay curious, and join the conversation. You're listening to Dove and Dragon Radio, where the dove brings clarity and the dragon drives results.
Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with my special guest, Peter, today. We're going to discuss his new book that he has out, and he's a first-time podcast guest. So welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what is the name of your book for all of our wonderful viewers and listeners?
Yes, the title of the book is Yesterday Was Not So Long Ago.
Okay, so what is the book about?
The book is actually a memoir that was originally written by my mother when she was in her late 70s and early 80s. And it was originally put together by a series of journals and diaries and notes that she had taken with her from World War II.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on during World War II, depending on which country you're in, what side you're of the aisle, preferably, that you're
Yes.
on. There's a lot. So, in a nutshell, what is your mother's take?
My mother was born in a little town called Erfurt, Germany, and she was a teenager when the war broke out. She was a German citizen. And the beginning of the book talks about her years in that town, which she loved, and all of the normal things that would happen to a young person growing up in this town. Um, of course, then the war broke out, and everything changed.
Of course, because you start as a teenager. This is me, teenage female here. You're in a town, you have school going on, you have love interest, maybe, you have fighting with parents, because that's completely normal for teenagers. It doesn't matter what genre you're from.
Yes.
And then you have something, because this major outside of everything that you're experiencing just bombard your entire life. So how did that really affect her?
Well, it affected her in many ways, obviously. And I start the book talking about, the formative years and her girlfriends and some boyfriends and all of the normal things, like you said, that teenagers would encounter. And then, of course, everything changed when the Nazi Party came to power, and things became very difficult fairly fast. Um, Needless to say, the Nazi regime was rather brutal, and my mother had to navigate her way around all of the radical changes that occurred.
So in this small town, what did that look like?
It basically was in those days. Of course, we're talking about now the 1930s. There weren't cell phones, there wasn't the internet or immediate communication. So, in some respects, this town was rather isolated, even though it was very centrally located in the country of Germany, um, and it had a rich history. it was really not a pivotal place. So things started to happen, and we go through that in the book. Things like she had a Jewish friend who all of a sudden who was a very bright student, as it turned out, and she all of a sudden, from going to be the teacher's pet, was put in the back of the classroom. Um, the Sunday rituals of going to church were replaced by political rallies. Um, all of a sudden, they were part of what they called the Hitler Youth. So they all started to wear uniforms. So these kind of things were occurring, and a lot of the citizens kind of took it in stride, not realizing the bigger scope of what was going on around them.
So at what point did your mom actually understand what was going on?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, but my mother and my grandmother were not fans of Hitler and the Nazi regime. And really, um, in studying it further, I've discovered that the Nazi regime really only had about 10% support of the general population. But the general population was obviously afraid of falling out of line. It became, increasingly a fascist regime, and one in which one did not speak out or do anything out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Right. It's you have the majority does not agree with it, but we're afraid of the 10% that says this is what things are going to do, because if you don't do it, now we're going to have violence against you.
Right. And
So
the violence grew. I'm sorry, the
Mhm.
violence grew stronger, and the repercussions. Everyone in this town knew that if they dared to speak up, they would probably be taken away, and God knows where they end up. So,
Right, there's
um,
too many horror stories from over there of what people now we hear the stories now. We didn't hear the stories. This is the
right,
40s, the 50s. We didn't hear that till recently. So I don't know. I wasn't there. My grandparents didn't talk about it, even though they served. But at the same time, we hear the horror stories today, where back then it was, we don't know what's happening to our citizens.
correct. Which is really the scary part of the whole saga.
Right. It's when you don't know. It's lack of information. It's not the information that we have today. It's lack of.
Right.
And that can be more scary than having abundance of information.
Right. And the environment was such after World War One, the Germans suffered a terrible defeat in World War One. And as a result, people were, I mean, they were just economically deprived in every way you can possibly think of. Um, and it was pretty chaotic. And that all bred its underlying circumstances for the for the Nazi party to gain control.
Right. Okay, so history tells us how things worked out. Your mom has a different perspective because she was there. I know history books, and I
Yes,
only know American history books. I have not read the other parties' history books, even though I'm big on reading all history. But you have, in general, you have a country that lost the war. Now you basically in a depression trying to recover from the war. And we see this going on today in different countries. You're trying to rebuild. Now you have a party trying to rise up to take control. because they have a vision of what things should be. And not everyone's going to agree because no one agrees on anything ever. That's history, that's even today.
Yes,
And then it's going to be the one that speaks the loudest, or in this case, is the most violent.
correct. So, um, but life in general went on. It wasn't
Mhm.
like it didn't, but and people adapted fairly
Mhm.
quickly, and unfortunately became the norm. I mean, there's a little section in the book which talks about my grandmother, and my grandmother, um, who was really opposed to what was going on, spoke out a couple of times, and my grandfather had to stop her cold in her tracks and say, "You can't talk about this. Certainly not in public. You are putting yourself and my and our family in tremendous danger."
Mhm.
So, um,
That generation had very spicy women. I will say that.
well, I can tell you as an aside, it
Mhm.
was very interesting as my mother was writing this book because she spent almost 11 years in actually writing the script,
Mhm.
and she was very meticulous about it. She would, write one page. If she didn't like one or two words, she would cross them out, and then she would retype the whole page again. So it was truly a labor of love. And my father, who is in the book, and that's a whole other story, um, would sit downstairs in the living room as she was writing this book at night, and he would be furious. And my mother couldn't figure out what it was. Well, my mother, as it turns out, wrote segments about several boyfriends that she had. And even though my parents were married for 60 years, my father was jealous.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so we it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, you date. It happens.
Right,
But
right. I mean, these were her teenage years, for God's
yeah.
sakes. But anyway, but the story, as it was written, uh, while very good, needed some editing. So what
Mhm.
happened was after she wrote the book and she passed away, the book sat on a shelf for quite a number of years. And it was only when I joined a writers group down here in Florida that I got inspired to take that manuscript off the shelf and start reworking it. Um, I then hired an editor who was
Mhm.
fabulous, as it turns out, and she heard about my father's story and said, we should really incorporate that, and we should also incorporate what happened to your mother after she left Germany. So, we,
Well, obviously something good happened because you're here.
right, right. So basically, in a nutshell, I can tell you that the story is such that my father was a German Jew,
Okay.
and his family lived in Stuttgart, which wasn't even that far from where my mother lived, born in the same year. But my father's family was fortunate to see what was going on early on and left Germany, came to the United States. And then at age 18, my father volunteered for the US Army. Now, because he could speak fluent German, he ended up in a special corps called the Ritchie Boys. And this was a group of about 10,000 American soldiers, all of whom could speak fluent German. And they were dispersed after training. They were dispersed to different divisions um, of the American forces so that they could interrogate
Translate.
prisoners of war. So my father goes through the Battle of the Bulge and a number of conflicts and ends up being stationed in my mother's hometown. And that's how they met. So they meet, and then it's a very quick romance. The Russians and the Americans make an agreement. I think it was called the Potsdam Agreement, and Germany is carved up into different sectors.
Hmm.
And my mother happened to be in what became the Russian sector. And the Russians were really brutal. I mean, they had sustained the largest loss of life in World War II and had, fortunately for them, survived the German onslaught, which got as close to um, Moscow as you can imagine. Anyway, so my mother was now caught behind the lines. My father Um, my father wants her badly to try and escape. And after two attempts, the first time she got caught by the Russians, and then the second time with a guide through the mountains, she rendezvous with my father. And that's the basic story.
It's a romance novel, basically.
Yes, it
Caught,
is.
caught in war.
Correct.
That,
Yes.
that's completely what it is. It's a true story because you said it's a memoir, and it is. But at the same time, it's a true romance novel.
Yes, it is. It truly is. Some of the reviews, which have been really good about the book, talk about the fact that what makes this book a little bit different from the many books that are out there about World War II is that A, it didn't really talk about the Holocaust at all. It wasn't about the Holocaust.
Hmm.
It talked about everyday life and how it changed for my mother and what she did to survive and the amount of courage and quiet strength that she had along the way. um, so um, it's it's um, it's a different perspective.
It is. It's something that we don't see and we don't really think about. How is
Right.
this affecting our citizens versus the global effect that that's we concentrate on?
Yes. So it also now is resonating, the book is resonating a lot more, even because of the circumstances we have in our own country and
Hmm.
things that are going on around us. And are there parallels that we should be concerned about?
Oh, there's definitely parallels. If you understand history, there's definitely parallels. And you can
Right.
take either side of the argument. I'm not going to get into politics, but
No.
there's definitely parallels between World War II and what we see today. And we have exactly the same thing happening. No one's speaking up.
Right. So there you go. I mean, that's just testimonial to the fact that, history could have a way of repeating itself, and it usually does.
It does.
So,
If you don't understand history and you turn it out, you will repeat because history is a circle. If you go through every conflict, everything that we ever had from all written history that we know of, it's always a repeating circle because no one listens to the past. Hopefully, with your mom's book, we have a little bit more insight and we can break the circle.
yes, that's the idea. That was another motivation for me. And as things have progressed here, it's become, much more poignant. And I have friends of mine who are now saying to me, wow, your book really has even present relevance.
Hmm. Anything written in the past, you can find present relevance if you look hard enough. Or even if you're not looking and just read and go, wow, isn't that happening today?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, um, but it's certainly an interesting story, and I hope to get it out as far and wide as I can. The book was actually just released in June of last year, and one of the interesting things that I plan to do is in September, I've been invited by this town called Effort to give a lecture and in September, and I'm going to try to do it on what would have been my mother's 106th birthday.
That would be great tribute to her.
Yes, I think so.
So, where can our listeners and our viewers find your book today?
Okay, well, I have a website, www.peterbenario.com. And if you click on that, you can order. It has a link that goes directly to Amazon. It's also on a number of other websites. It's on the Barnes and Noble website. It's on the Apple Books website. It's
So,
readily available in both soft cover and ebook.
so basically, everywhere that books are traditional sold online.
Correct. Yes.
We'll keep it that, that because otherwise, our viewers going to go, wait, where can I get it? I'm confused. If you buy
Uh,
a book online, you can buy it there.
you could go right to Amazon, and with the title, it's not a problem to look it up.
And what is that title again?
Yes, and here's what the book looks like. It's called Yesterday Was Not So Long Ago.
Awesome. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I wish you all the best at your speaking engagement. I'm not going to try to butcher the name of the town. I butcher
Okay.
everything else. This is why I don't do last names because I butcher everyone's name but my own. They call me the queen of butchering names. Yes, it is a thing.
Okay.
But thank you so much, and I wish you all the love and all the best for this book. And
Thank you
please,
very much.
if you need a guide of what is happening today, please go back in history and go just World War II. Just go back that far.
Absolutely.
But thank you.
You're very welcome.